What's going on, FA Nation? Jon Impemba here with James Grande, bringing you the Fantasy Alarm NBA DFS live stream. James, it was trade deadline day. A ton of fireworks. What's going on in the NBA today? Some huge names, flipping teams. You were the man on the playbook. Did you find it difficult today with some of the moves that were made?
Not particularly, because not a lot of the teams on today's slate were impacted. Like, there were trades in Philly. Houston, Robert Covington's active, but we don't really have any word. And plus, that trade had gone through previously. The Knicks, obviously moved Marcus Morris to, I think, the trade deadline winners, in my opinion, the Clippers. I think that was a huge get for them, but that's opened up some value. But I don't necessarily think the trade deadline impacted today's slate. I think it's going to impact slates going forward, because we're already getting a lot of news about tomorrow and who's playing, who's not. Right. So today's slate wasn't, directly impacted. It was a very fun deadline. Let's just say that. Very fun deadline, but nothing that stuck out to me on today's slate that was like, wow, we need to pivot here because player X was traded.
Yeah, that's fair. We have a 5-game slate for today. Some decent game totals, only one game under 220. That's Orlando, New York. But you got 230.5, New Orleans, Chicago, 229, San Antonio, Portland, 227, Philly, Milwaukee, and then the late night hammer tonight, Houston, LA, topping out at 238.5. So for a small slate, a lot of high totals. It's been a high scoring week so far. Probably going to continue tonight, don't you think?
Yeah, and honestly, at first glance, I hated that lowest total in the Knicks Magic game, and throughout the day, I've grown to like it even more. So I kind of like every game on this slate. I do think there is something to be said, like high scoring game totals. I don't think tonight's going to be one of those nights where we're talking about like 400 plus points on winning tournaments. I think it's going to be tough sledding tonight because the value is kind of ugly across the board.
Yeah, no, value is gross. Value is gross. I agree 100%. So check out the value vault. Sean Mitchell, gave you some plays to kind of get in your lineup, and maybe we'll come across a little bit more as we go through your playbook, James. So let's go ahead and kick it off. At the point guard position here, currently Westbrook's questionable. I think that's going to make a huge impact.
He's in. He's
officially in. Okay.
He's officially in.
Yeah. All right. Well, then that kind of
playing today, sitting tomorrow.
Sitting tomorrow, then he said.
Sitting
right?
Tomorrow. Yep, okay. Playing today, sitting tomorrow.
All right, well, now Westbrook's in. You have him listed at the top of the playbook. How are you comparing him to Lillard? Because those are the two top-priced guys.
I mean, I've mentioned it a couple times recently that the Lakers have been very bad against point guards recently. Over the last month, they've been a bottom 5 team defensively. So I think Westbrook is fine for tournaments. I probably would go as far as to say he's fine for cash games. Cash games are ugly tonight, especially with the lack of value. So I think Westbrook's fine for all formats. I still lean Lillard. We love attacking the Spurs. He put up a dud last game, obviously, and it was bound to happen because he was averaging 70 plus fantasy points, right. And even with that dud, he is still averaging 71 fantasy points over his last 5 games. I think the matchup is fine. It's at home. We love using Lillard at home. 8th most fantasy points per game to the point guard position the Spurs are allowing. So I lean Lillard. I think Westbrook is fine, but I would tend, in most lineups, I am playing Lillard over Westbrook.
All right. If we're going into the middle tier here, Lonzo Ball gets a good matchup against Chicago. Even with Zion and Drew Holiday and Ingram and everybody back, he's still producing at a really high level. And then somebody that we were playing earlier this year, kind of getting a new boost due to injury to Chris Dunn, is Tomas Satoransky. Talk about you sort of the mid-tier plays here.
Yeah, I think Lonzo is actually like the one guy who has seen his fantasy points minute rise with Zion on the floor. And, he's been very consistent. I think we could deploy him in really any format. I don't think there's going to be a lot of ownership on Lonzo either. I don't think many people realize how good he's actually been. He's only failed to hit 30 fantasy points once since Zion has been on the floor with him. So very safe floor. I love Satoransky. We mentioned on the podcast last night, it would have been a third straight game of 30-plus minutes and likely 30-plus fantasy points if that game hadn't blown out in the fourth quarter against Toronto. The Bulls have had a lot of rest here in between games, and now, it's a huge pace-up spot against a bad defense. I think Satoransky is an elite play for all formats. To be perfectly honest, I have a lot of exposure to the Bulls tonight in all formats, primarily cash games. I think there's about 5 or 6 Bulls you can roster considering this Pelicans defense is bad. I think Satoransky is my second favorite cash game play on Chicago. We'll go third favorite cash game play on Chicago. And I think, the pivot off of him for tournaments, I think is Kobe White, who, is popping in a lot of projections tonight. And, it's something to be said, like Chris Dunn has exited the lineup. The Bulls are lacking offensive firepower, especially since Lauri Markkanen went out too. Like they're really down to Zach Lavine. That's literally their offense. And White is a walking bucket. Has he struggled? Yes, but he has seen 24 minutes in back-to-back games. I think that
shots in back-to-back games.
Yeah, I think the tournament pivot is definitely Kobe White. I love him for tournaments tonight. So I think Satoransky's fine for tournaments as well. I just think there is a higher ceiling at White's price compared to Satoransky's price for tournaments.
Yeah, I agree with you. If we're looking at value, Michael Carter-Williams made the Value Vault article tonight as well. He's in your playbook. It's not that Markelle Fultz is out, but he's just seen increased minutes off the bench, up over 20 now, last handful of games. What's your realistic expectation out of MCW tonight?
I mean, I think MCW is a viable candidate all formats tonight. It's a price play. It's a matchup play against the Knicks. I mean, he's going to be, matched up against guys like who? I mean, Elfrid Payton, we talk about a defender that, is okay in the steals department, but he is not someone that's going to stay in front of you. MCW is essentially taking over the DJ Augustine role. I mean, 24 minutes last night. We just saw him play 24 minutes twice in the last 4 games. He's given us 30 fantasy points. I think we can expect somewhere in, the 20 to 30 fantasy point output. And at his price tag, that's more than fine for all formats. I mean, obviously, if we're playing tournaments, we want the 30 rather than the 20. Right. But I think if we get the 20 at 3,900, I mean, that's still 5X. So I think Carter-Williams is settling in nicely to that DJ Augustine role. The Magic are just banged up as a whole, and they're just kind of forced to play him. And Fultz struggled last night, and that led to more run. If he struggles again, we could see Michael Carter-Williams in an extended role again.
It is a really good spot for Fultz going up against Elf Payton. Right. But like you said, that spot moves to MCW if Fultz ends up struggling. So, we'll have to see exactly if that ends up. Obviously, a tougher spot. Orlando played Boston last night or whatever. So a little bit tougher game than they'll have against the Knicks. If you jump on over to your shooting guards, I mean, how much does Westbrook being active now affect your shares of Harden?
Should it? I mean, this is a guy who's averaging nearly 40 actual points a game, and largely with Russell Westbrook on the floor. It's not like, we've seen outside of back-to-backs, there hasn't been like much injury for the two where they haven't shared the floor together. I think on DraftKings, we should temper our expectations a little bit considering he's over 12K. Like that's really scary. I think we limit our exposure to tournaments there. But I think 11.5 is a price tag that we usually jump on for James Harden, even when Westbrook's in the lineup. So I don't think it really should impact us on FanDuel. Now, if you're asking me like how I prioritize spend ups, he's not my number one guy. I mentioned it last night about Anthony Davis, and I don't think Robert Covington has really changed my opinion on that very much. I think Anthony Davis has a distinct advantage over whoever he may be facing in that Houston front court. Yeah. So he's not my number one spend up, but 11.5 is a really intriguing price. And I hope people, get scared off by Westbrook because hey, hello, they've been playing together all year.
Right.
So, I mean, I'm fine with James Harden. GPP is more in DraftKings because of the price, but I think you could deploy him all formats on FanDuel.
Okay. We go down. You have, again, shooting guard always pretty stacked. And that's why it's kind of, the question with Westbrook, because you guys have like DeMar DeRozan, Zach Lavine, other players aren't listed there, Drew Holiday. Like, it's a pretty good shooting guard spot here. Do you have a favorite of the group? I mean, we know Lavine obviously has the best matchup up against the Pelicans, but I mean, DeRozan has been killing it of late as well.
I think Zach Lavine is one of my favorite plays of the slate, and he's been a core play for me all day in cash and tournaments. Price point is nice. The matchup is nice, as you mentioned. I mean, I mentioned Satoransky. I buried the lead a little bit when I mentioned Satoransky was my third favorite bull. Right. Zach Lavine is number one, and we've seen a 40-point floor, and we saw a 70-point ceiling recently. And this is one of those games in this up-tempo environment where, is Drew Holiday a good defender? Sure. But Lavine's one of those guys that gets going. It's going to be hard to stop. Plus, right. If he was that good, I mean, the Pelicans are bottom 10 defense against the shooting guard position. So I think everything lines up for Lavine tonight. I think he's a core member of every one of my lineups. Not everyone, but most, especially cash games. And I think DeRozan's perfectly fine. Now, a lot of people are going to be playing Lamarcus Aldridge, so I think that the ownership is depressed on, DeRozan. We've seen Aldridge really, really perform well against his old team this year, 47 fantasy points per game. So DeRozan's taken a little step back, but, obviously Whiteside could potentially cause problems for Aldridge, and that would lead to more DeMar DeRozan. So I think the pivot off of Lavine, Harden is DeRozan. Okay. Only tournaments for me for Drew Holiday. He has been really impacted by Zion, and we mentioned last night in the podcast when we were gushing about Brandon Ingram. I mean, Ingram has now suddenly gone back to where he was, where he's taking a whole bunch of shots, and Holiday is not. So I don't have a ton of interest. I get the appeal. I mean, the Bulls don't have Chris Dunn, so the matchup is better than it would be if Dunn was there. I just think that I'd rather use guys like DeRozan or Lavine or Skuld get James Harden.
Sure. Where are you looking at value at shooting guard?
There's not a lot, John. I mean, honestly, it's the Pelicans. I think you can play Josh Hart. Josh Hart's been essentially really good. I mean, he's the sixth man. He plays. He closes games. He's been at 28 plus minutes in 3 straight and 28 plus fantasy points. And we saw JJ Redick give 0 minutes, and then he suddenly played 21 minutes and put up a decent game. I think both those guys are viable. Other than that, Evan Fournier is really cheap across the industry, and he's going to garner a lot of ownership tonight, especially on FanDuel, $5,200 at a weak position where you look and you're like, there's really no one to spend down on. So I think Fournier stands out on FanDuel to me. But other than that, I don't think we need to really get crazy.
All right. Let's go over to small forward. You have Giannis not in the playbook that I'm seeing.
I haven't listed as
power forward. I lied. He's a power forward. You're right. They moved him. They always move his position. Throws me off. He's a small forward, though, on FanDuel still. So how are you? I mean, you have LeBron. The pricing on LeBron is interesting. He's 10-7 on FanDuel. On DraftKings, he's 10-4. Great spot against Houston. Is he, if you're picking a top play, is it LeBron tonight?
No, it's Anthony Davis.
Okay.
Not LeBron. But I mean, 62 fantasy points last time out, went for 59 against Houston. It's a pace-up spot. Houston doesn't defend point guards. It's kind of a matchup nightmare. I don't really know what Houston's going to do. I guess they could put Covington on LeBron and they put PJ Tucker on Davis or vice versa. But yeah, either way, it's going to be a nightmare.
I would imagine Tucker could be LeBron and Covington on AD.
It's going to be a nightmare either way. I mean, any way you slice it, they might split the time, and it doesn't matter. So, I mean, LeBron is definitely the clear-cut spend-up for me at small forward. But a lot of my lineups have value guys. Like, you could play Ingram. I think he's perfectly fine. But I think Chandler Hutchinson, Kevin Knox are kind of two guys that I've been looking at all day.
Yeah.
Carmelo Anthony, $5,300 is very cheap. I think you can play him for tournaments. But a lot of my lineups are spending up with Harden or Davis or Embiid or Lillard. So, I probably have less exposure to LeBron James than most of the field.
Okay. And I mean, again, it's a tough game to fade, to not have a lot of exposure. So if you're making multiple lineups, he's probably, for me, I think you'd probably be in a third of them. Just that 238 game total. We know he has triple double upside. But I can see where you're going with that.
I mean, we have 4 totals over 227, so
yeah.
It's not like this game is 238 and then every other game's like 215, 220. Like there are other games, and again, I do have the exposure to Davis, to Harden, just not so much LeBron.
Okay. Going to power forward, where you do actually have Giannis listed there. Again, small forward on FanDuel. You mentioned Anthony Davis as your top play. It's tough to get exposure to multiple of these plays because there is, the lack of value on this slate. But again, we've seen him now in competitive games go off for, top level production. If you're ranking sort of the top plays, whether it's Davis, Giannis, Harden, Westlake, where does Giannis rank for you tonight?
I have little to no exposure to Giannis, and I feel terrible about it. It's also because I'm not playing like a whole bunch of lineups, and look, he's gone for 60 plus in 5 straight. It's hard to not rank him like 1 or 2 or 3. Yeah. It's really hard because that's been the floor. I mean, 7 of his last 9, he's gone for 60 plus, and the other 2 he went for 50 plus. So he's literally been over 50 plus fantasy points in 9 straight games. What more do you really need? It's just Philly is that really lengthy, annoying defensive team. They could put Horford on him, who's a really good defender. They could put Ben Simmons, who people are touting as defensive player of the year. They can bring Thibault in for 25 minutes and he might foul out in 7 minutes, but those 7 minutes, he could give Giannis a hell of a time. So, I mean, I think this game is more difficult for Giannis than a lot of other matchups. I don't think there are many teams that can slow him down. I would probably put him 4th. So I think the rest of the power forward is really elite. So I don't necessarily have much exposure. I would probably get my exposure on FanDuel where small forward is a lot weaker than power forward is.
All right. Who else are you looking at power forward then? I mean, obviously Anthony Davis is your top play. I'm not going to argue with you. I mean, the price tag on him is fantastic. And it's a great matchup up against Houston. So again, we talked about the matchup, who's going to defend him. But outside of AD, where else are we looking?
I actually love Julius Randle for tournaments tonight. The Marcus Morris trade is super intriguing. With Morris off the floor this year, it's almost a 31% usage rate, 1.3 fantasy points per minute, and it's not an easy matchup against Orlando. But Orlando is on a back-to-back. The Knicks are home. I could see Randle breaking a slate at 10%. I mean, especially on a 5-game slate where we're all on the same guys. Right. There is obviously less variance because there is a smaller player pool. If you get someone like Julius Randle at 10%, go for 50 or 60, I mean, that could be a difference in winning a tournament. I think Randle is really good. I love Zion. I think Zion's going to be very popular tonight as well, considering where the minutes have been and the fantasy production, the shot attempts, really everything. And ultimately, it's the Bulls. They rank dead last against power forwards and centers. They're the 3rd worst rebound team in basketball. They're slightly better with Thad defensively, but it's not like Thad is going up to grab 10 rebounds. He's not very athletic. He doesn't get off the floor very high. So Zion's going to have no problem in that matchup. Lamarcus Aldridge, I mentioned, I have him written up top. I didn't really need to expand on Lamarcus Aldridge. It's a revenge narrative. He's gone for 47 fantasy points. He's too cheap. That's just, He's going to be chalky. So I have no problem playing Lamarcus Aldridge. And I love the fact that on DraftKings I could play him at center since center is so dreadful tonight. Yeah, it's disgusting. And then 2 more guys, Aaron Gordon. Aaron Gordon has been great. He had another 40-plus fantasy point game, back-to-back double-doubles he had last night. And, I mean, again, it's Julius Randle is not a good defender. The Knicks front court really struggles. 6th most fantasy points against power forwards this year, and the recent form is great. So I love Gordon and Thad Young for cash because Thad Young is just going to play us 30 minutes. He's going to probably teeter around 30 fantasy points, and We mentioned last night there's probably like 35 fantasy point upside, so I can get behind that in cash as well.
All right. And let's go ahead to that ugly center position here, where it's basically you spend up on FanDuel or you spend nowhere. All right, like there's just the lack of value. Maybe you can go to Bobby Portis. If we're talking value on FanDuel. But you have Embiid, Whiteside, and Brook Lopez. So, obviously, when you're limited to the 3 centers, you don't have much to go with.
And I have Portis, Mitchell Robinson written up top for GPP. So it's literally like, look, Embiid is the clear-cut guy. He's been good in this, or he was good on Christmas Day, 55 fantasy points in 28 minutes. Brook Lopez, he played 34 minutes in that game. I think they're going to need him in this matchup. I prefer him on FanDuel. He's had 9 of 10 games, he's had 2+ blocks. And we just saw a 9-block game out of Brook Lopez. So, you get that on FanDuel. I mean, you're sitting really pretty at that price tag. And the Whiteside, I mean, look, the floor is like 15 fantasy points. I mean, we just saw literally 15. But the 2 games prior, he literally won everyone tournaments where he went 50+ in 2 straight games. Bobby Portis has been playing minutes. Mitchell Robinson is a little banged up. So, they could lean Bobby Portis' way because of that, fact. Plus, Marcus Morris was their small forward, but played power forward for them as well. Right. Now that he's gone, I mean, Portis does have more of a route to back a power forward as much as he does as backup center. So, because Mitchell Robinson, does play, they have the weirdest rotations ever. I mean, they have Taj Gibson starting at center. He's not a center, he's a power forward. Then they have Bobby Portis, who's played power forward his whole life, play as a center. Mitchell Robinson, like it's a mess. But I mean, there are minutes to be had with Morris gone. So yeah, I can get behind Portis. Would probably be a little ahead of Robinson for me, especially considering he played 28 minutes last game. I literally don't have, like, just looking at the player pool, John. I mean, Vucevic, you could go there. He looked terrible last night. The matchup is fine. He could get Mitchell Robinson in foul trouble immediately, and then there's no one to worry about, really. Like, Taj is old and unathletic. Bobby Portis is a spaz, but he doesn't, like, play, he looks like he's playing defense, but he's actually not. There's literally no one else. So if you want to, like, go crazy and play Dwight Howard because you just theorize who does – well, yeah, and who the hell does Houston even have to like – go up and stop a lob up to Dwight Howard? Like, who's going to jump with Dwight Howard and if they throw a lob to him? I sure don't.
Maybe they finally play Hartenstein.
No,
probably not either.
I said those exact words in the podcast, and you poo-pooed it, so I'm going to poo-poo it right back. But yeah, I mean, center's ugly. It's just, I think it's pretty clear-cut. Embiid, Whiteside.
I don't know why they traded.
They probably should have kept Jordan Bell. Clearly, Jordan Bell is not that good if he's not. Doesn't get any.
Buffalo is the answer. So
yeah. But yeah, I mean that is the slate. 5 games, very little value. Unfortunately, the value is like at one position. It's at point guard. It's at Colby White, Carter Williams. You can play Rondo, and then it really drops off. I think there are like Knicks value. I think is going to be really intriguing because we're still waiting on the RJ Barrett news.
So, I thought he's going to play.
He is going to play. Has there been a minutes? There's nothing on his minutes. So if there's nothing that comes with RJ Barrett minutes, then I could get behind. Are we sure RJ Barrett's in? I saw that he was questionable.
I thought I just saw that he was going to play.
RJ Barrett remains questionable Thursday.
Where is that from? Most recently?
No. That was...
As of 6:02, Barrett expected to play Thursday against the Magic.
Okay, so I could go there then. I can get behind some RJ Barrett if there's no minutes restriction just because of price. You mentioned on the podcast last night.
Trier and Dotson are both out.
That's appealing because
now no Morris, like their rotation. You could probably go Reggie Bullock, if you really wanted to.
That was where I was going to go if Barrett did get rolled out. The Knicks value is just going to be chalky. I don't think you need to do it. I still think Knox is fine because I still think we get 25 minutes of Kevin Knox, and if he gets us 20 fantasy points, he's 3.1K on DraftKings, and he's min salary on FanDuel. So I'd go Knox, and I would play RJ Barrett, and I would play Reggie Bullock too. Just sprinkle them in, not like overweight, but sprinkle all of them in.
Yep, I agree with you there. All right, 6:33 roster lock quickly approaching. 7:30 tonight, so we have the extra hour, I believe, to or half hour rather, to get everything in. So hopefully we'll get that Barrett minutes limit because they are at the 7:30 tip tonight. But for now, everybody, we'll in chat, answer your questions. Good luck.